Hawaii smelled like paradise. The air was thick with salt and something floral I couldn't quite place, plumeria, maybe, or hibiscus. The moment we stepped off the plane, I felt my muscles loosen, the weight of life back home melting off me. It was exactly what we needed. No emails, no deadlines. Just sun, sand, and the steady, hypnotic crash of the waves. My partner, Aaron, squeezed my hand as we stepped into the rental car. No stress, he had said on the flight. We deserve this. I believed him. We checked into the resort, a sprawling beachfront property with thatched roofs and infinity pools that blurred into the horizon. Everything was in shades of gold, the sand, the sunset, the sheen of sweat on Aaron's forehead. We weren't the only ones who had come looking for an escape. The lobby was buzzing with tourists, families in matching Hawaiian shirts, honeymooners draped over each other in post-wedding exhaustion. We were all here for the same reason, to forget. But something was wrong. It started with the emergency alert that popped up on our phones before we even reached the room. Seismic activity detected near Mauna Loa. No evacuation order at this time. I showed Aaron. He rolled his eyes. They always get these, he said. Remember Iceland last year? All those warnings, and nothing happened. He had a point. We had seen this before, geologists overreacting, tourists panicking for no reason. But as I looked around the lobby, I noticed something else, the staff. Their smiles were tight, the kind you wear when you don't want to scare someone. That night, we ate at the resort's open-air restaurant, watching the sky go from orange to deep violet. The food was incredible, grilled fish with citrus, sweet island bread, cold beer that felt like silk sliding down my throat. I let myself relax. Until the ground moved. It was subtle at first, a barely there vibration under my chair. Aaron noticed it too, pausing mid-bite. The tremor lasted only a few seconds, just long enough for glasses to clink together on nearby tables. Then, silence. Nervous laughter rippled through the restaurant. A couple of people clapped, as if it had been some kind of special effects show put on just for us. A waiter passed by, setting down a tray of cocktails with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You guys okay?" "Yeah," Aaron said, glancing at me. That was weird. The waiter nodded, like he had heard it 1,000 times before. "It happens. The island breathes." We laughed, but something about the way he said it stuck with me. We went back to our room, our private balcony overlooking the ocean. I let the breeze lull me into something close to peace, the steady rhythm of the waves below drowning out the nagging thought in the back of my mind. That night, I dreamt of fire. The next morning, the emergency alert had changed. Eruption warning in effect for Mauna Loa. Monitor updates from local authorities. I stared at my phone, trying to shake the grogginess from my head. Aaron was still asleep, his body curled toward mine, breathing steady. Outside, the world looked normal. Sunlight glowed on the water, early risers stretched on the beach, a child's laughter echoed from the pool. But something was different. When we went down to breakfast, the tension was heavier. The news played on the bar's TV, footage of Mauna Loa from a helicopter, smoke curling lazily from the summit. Scientists discussed lava flows, possible evacuation zones. We needed to leave. Flights were booked solid. The ferry terminals were packed. Rental car lots were empty, tourists had started hoarding vehicles, desperate for any way off the island. The roads leading to the airport were a nightmare, bumper-to-bumper traffic, people honking, screaming out windows. It was like watching the first domino fall. By midday, the air felt different, thicker, harder to breathe. The wind carried something acrid, something metallic. Ash. The explosion came just before sunset. A deep, hollow boom, the kind that shakes your ribs, rattles your teeth. Then, the sky changed. A pillar of black smoke shot into the clouds, climbing higher, blooming outward like ink spilling into water. The screaming started soon after. People ran in every direction, a chaotic blur of color and movement. The resort staff tried to maintain order, directing guests toward the lobby, but no one was listening. Aaron grabbed my wrist, his grip iron tight. "We need to go. Now." We sprinted to the car. The parking lot was a disaster, people abandoning luggage, some shoving others out of the way. The air was thick with shouts, crying, the shrill sound of car alarms. We pulled out onto the road, joining the mass exodus heading inland. The glow from the mountain was visible now, an unnatural red pulse against the darkening sky. Then, everything stopped. Gridlock. Cars stretched for miles, unmoving. People abandoned them, running on foot, clutching backpacks, dragging children behind them. Aaron slammed his hands on the wheel. "We're not getting out this way." We turned on the radio, desperate for any updates. Static. Then, a garbled voice cutting through. Lava flow moving toward Highway 11. Ashfall expected to reach coastal areas. Do not attempt to drive through thick ash. I looked out the window. The sky was no longer blue. The first flakes of ash drifted down, soft as snow, coating the windshield, the road, my skin. The air was wrong. The wrong smell, the wrong temperature, the wrong weight pressing down on us. Aaron reached for my hand. His was shaking. "This is bad," he whispered. The line of cars stretched endlessly ahead. No way forward. No way back. We were trapped. The sky darkened faster than it should have. At first, I thought it was just the sun setting, the usual tropical twilight. But when I looked up, the color was wrong, too heavy, too thick, a churning wall of smoke rolling across the horizon. The distant red glow of Mauna Loa pulsed brighter now, flickering through the haze like a living thing. Aaron squeezed my hand so hard my fingers went numb. We sat in the unmoving car, watching as the first true wave of panic overtook the stalled traffic. People who had once been honking, shouting in frustration, now left their vehicles behind entirely, choosing to run. Families pulled children out of back seats, some grabbing only a single backpack before fleeing down the highway. An elderly couple struggled to climb over a guardrail, their faces masks of sheer disbelief. The radio crackled again, voices cutting in and out through bursts of static. Highway is impassable. New fissures opening, lava now moving at increased speed. Fatal conditions for those caught in the ashfall. Aaron let out a sharp breath, a sound that was close to a laugh but far from amusement. "We're not getting out of here in a car." He was right. Ahead of us, a truck was turned sideways across both lanes, its driver standing outside, screaming at no one in particular. The other cars had nowhere to go. There was no more road, only a line of metal coffins stretching into the smoke-choked horizon. A warm gust of wind hit my face, carrying the smell of sulfur and something else, something deep, something scorched. The air felt wrong in my lungs, too dry, as if I was breathing dust instead of oxygen. We had to move. I grabbed our small day pack from the back seat and shoved the water bottles inside, along with the hotel's complimentary granola bars, then yanked the car keys from the ignition. The act felt final, like we were abandoning something more than just the vehicle. "We go on foot," I said. Aaron nodded, but I saw the hesitation in his eyes. "To where?" I didn't have an answer. The roads were death traps, and turning back to the resort wasn't an option. But inland? The island's heart was where the fire lived, the mountain itself splitting open. Going inland felt like walking straight into a burning house. But the coast wouldn't save us either. There were no flights left. The ferries were gone. We were already dead, we just hadn't caught up to the reality of it yet. Another explosion rocked the sky. A sound like a gunshot, but deeper. A booming crack that sent vibrations through my ribs, down into the marrow of my bones. The ground groaned in response, a deep, unsettling rumble that made the pavement feel less like solid earth and more like the surface of something alive. Aaron and I ran. We followed the others, tourists, locals, all just bodies in motion, searching for any illusion of safety. Some people covered their faces with their shirts, trying to filter out the ash. Others wore sunglasses at night to protect their eyes. It didn't help. The ash was everywhere, getting into our mouths, our hair, the folds of our clothes. It fell in slow, deliberate waves, settling over us like a funeral shroud. A woman ahead of us collapsed. Just dropped to her knees in the middle of the road. A man, maybe her husband, tried to lift her, shaking her shoulders. But she didn't move. We kept running. The lava was coming faster now. I had always thought of it as a slow-moving thing, something that crawled, something you could outrun. But this wasn't a polite, creeping river of fire. This was an avalanche, a hungry thing that devoured the land in boiling, churning waves. It glowed through the smoke, a jagged red vein cutting through the blackness. We veered off the road, cutting through the trees, following a narrow dirt path that led uphill. It wasn't a conscious decision, just a primal one: go up, get higher, escape the flood of fire below. The trees were burning now. Not all of them, but enough that the scent of scorched leaves and wood smoke mixed with the sulfur, turning the air into something thick and choking. The heat wrapped around us like a second skin, our sweat evaporating before it could even form. Aaron tripped. I turned in time to see him hit the ground, hands breaking his fall against the dirt. I reached for him, but before I could help him up, the ground lurched. It didn't shake. It moved. A fissure cracked open not 10 feet from where we stood. A long, jagged wound in the earth, deep and black, splitting the trail in half. A rush of hot air burst upward, carrying flecks of molten rock. It sounded like the hissing of an animal, something angry, something waking up. Aaron scrambled to his feet. His hands were scraped raw, his breath ragged. He looked at me with wide, wild eyes. He coughed, doubled over, choking on the thick air. We have to. And then the trees around us erupted into flames. The heat was unbearable, pressing against my skin, stealing the air from my lungs. Fire curled around the trunks, leapt from branch to branch like a living thing. The jungle was burning. We ran again. I didn't know how far. How long. It felt like we had always been running, that the world had always been burning. The only thing that mattered was forward. Forward and up. When we finally stopped, it was because there was nowhere else to go. A clearing. A small, abandoned building, maybe a ranger station or an old lookout point. The door hung open, swinging slightly in the wind. Aaron fell against the doorway, breathing hard, his entire body trembling. I followed, stepping inside, slamming the door shut behind us. Darkness. Just the sound of our breathing, ragged and uneven. Outside, the world burned. And we were still trapped. The world outside was unrecognizable. Through the cracks in the ranger station's boarded-up windows, I could see the flickering glow of fire swallowing the jungle, devouring trees in long, crackling breaths. The air was thick with smoke and embers, shifting in the wind like restless ghosts. Ash fell in waves, coating the ground in an eerie, pale blanket. Aaron collapsed onto the wooden floor, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. He was covered in dirt, sweat, and soot. His shirt had a long tear down the side, his skin beneath red from the heat. I knelt beside him, checking his hands, his arms. Scraped but intact. His ankle was swollen, but not broken. He looked up at me, eyes wild. Did we outrun it? I didn't answer. I didn't know. Instead, I pressed my palm against his forehead. Too hot. Dehydration. The smoke wasn't helping. I grabbed the water bottle from my pack, unscrewed the cap, and pushed it into his shaking hands. He took a sip, then another. His grip tightened around the bottle like it was the only thing anchoring him to reality. Where are we? I glanced around. The ranger station was barely more than a shack, one room, dusty shelves lining the walls, an old metal desk in the corner. A rusted radio sat on top, its antenna bent. Maps were pinned to a corkboard, curling at the edges from humidity. A cot stood against the far wall, the thin mattress coated in grime. High ground, I said finally. Away from the road. Away from the lava. Aaron let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a sob. Yeah. And how long do you think this place is gonna last? I didn't answer that either. Instead, I moved to the window and pulled back a broken slat of wood. The fire hadn't reached us yet, but it was close. The jungle was burning from the outside in, flames creeping up the mountain, swallowing everything in their path. And the lava was still coming. In the distance, through the smoke, I could see it glowing, an unstoppable river of molten rock, slowly but surely consuming the island. The highway was already gone. The resort? Probably buried beneath ash by now. The coastline would be next. We weren't just trapped. We were surrounded. Time passed in a strange, disjointed way. Minutes, hours, I couldn't tell the difference anymore. The air inside the ranger station was stifling, filled with the scent of burnt wood and sweat. Every breath felt heavier than the last. Aaron sat against the wall, staring at the floor, rubbing his temples like he could massage away the pounding in his skull. His breathing was shallow. His eyes, bloodshot. Headache? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He nodded, rubbing his throat. Can't breathe right. It was the ash. It was getting into everything, our clothes, our hair, our lungs. The tiny particles settled deep inside, scraping against the walls of our throats, making every breath feel like inhaling sandpaper. I dug through the ranger station, searching for anything useful. There was a first aid kit, long expired but still stocked with bandages and antiseptic. A few dust-covered energy bars. A flashlight with dead batteries. And masks. Not the flimsy tourist kind, the real ones. Industrial-grade respirators, tucked away in a metal locker near the back. I grabbed two and hurried over to Aaron, pressing one into his hands. He blinked at it. Where? Doesn't matter. We pulled them on, the straps tight against our skulls, the filters humming softly with each inhale. The difference was instant. The air wasn't clean, but it was breathable. My chest felt a fraction lighter. Aaron let out a long, shaky breath. Okay. Okay. This is good. This is, something. It wasn't enough. Sometime later, maybe minutes, maybe hours, the ground shook. A low, deep tremor, not like before. This wasn't just the earth shifting beneath us. This was closer. Aaron stiffened. Did you feel that? I didn't answer. I was already moving toward the window, peeling back the wooden slat, staring out into the smoke-thick night. And then I saw it. The ground was splitting open. Not just lava, not just fire, new fissures were appearing along the mountain slope, jagged cracks ripping through the earth, glowing from within. The land itself was breaking apart, shuddering, groaning like a wounded animal. And we were sitting right on top of it. We have to go. Aaron struggled to his feet. Go where? I didn't know. I just knew that if we stayed here, we were dead. We left the ranger station behind, moving higher up the mountain, following an old dirt path that barely existed anymore. Every step was slow, deliberate. The ash was thicker now, clinging to our clothes, our skin. The respirators helped, but not enough. The fire was closing in. The jungle around us was turning to embers, trees collapsing under their own burning weight. The heat was unbearable, pressing against my back like a physical force. My skin stung, even through my sweat-drenched clothes. Aaron stumbled. I caught him before he could hit the ground. He swayed, blinking rapidly, like he was struggling to focus. "No," I said. "Not now. Keep moving." He nodded, but his steps were slower, heavier. I tightened my grip on his wrist, half dragging him up the path. Every few seconds, I glanced behind us, watching the way the flames crept closer, their glow licking at the edges of the trail. Then the earth moved again. A violent jolt, like something beneath us had snapped. The ground tilted. The path crumbled beneath our feet. Aaron let out a sharp cry as the dirt gave way, sending him sliding down the slope. I threw myself forward, reaching for him, my fingers brushing his wrist. And then he was gone. I hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from my lungs. I clawed my way forward, scrambling to the edge of the collapse, peering down into the swirling smoke. Aaron. Silence. Then, movement. A figure, barely visible through the haze. He was on his side, coughing, trying to push himself up. He hadn't fallen far, but far enough. The ground beneath him cracked. I felt it before I heard it, the deep, sickening groan of shifting earth. The fissure widened, a jagged mouth opening in the mountain skin. Aaron's eyes locked onto mine. And then he was falling. I lunged, reaching, screaming his name. But he was already gone. Swallowed whole. And there was nothing I could do. I didn't move for a long time. The ground where Aaron had stood was nothing but a smoking abyss now, a gaping wound in the earth. The cracks around the fissure still glowed, deep veins of molten rock pulsing like something alive. The air smelled like burnt stone, sulfur, and something worse, something scorched beyond recognition. I wanted to believe he was alive. That somehow, he had landed on solid ground, that there was a way to get to him. But the truth loomed over me like the ash-choked sky. No one survived a fall like that. Aaron was gone. I pressed my palms to the dirt, forcing myself to breathe. The mask I had found in the ranger station filtered out most of the ash, but the panic made every inhale feel like I was suffocating. My chest heaved. My limbs felt weightless and useless at the same time. I had to move. I couldn't let myself die here, not like this. Slowly, I rose to my feet, my legs trembling beneath me. The heat from the fissure was unbearable, blistering the skin on my exposed arms. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to get as far away as possible. But I hesitated. I didn't want to leave him. I looked at the hole again, hoping for something, anything. A noise. A sign. A voice. But there was only silence. So I turned and walked away. The jungle was unrecognizable. Everything had changed. The trees were skeletal now, stripped of their leaves, their blackened trunks cracking apart from the heat. The underbrush had been reduced to a smoldering graveyard of twisted roots and ash. The path that Aaron and I had taken up the mountain barely existed anymore, buried under debris and soot. I was alone. The last time I had seen people, they were running. That felt like hours ago, maybe longer. How many had made it? How many had been swallowed by the lava, by the collapsing earth? I tried not to think about it. I needed to focus on surviving. But the further I walked, the harder that became. The heat was unbearable now. It wasn't just coming from the lava flow in the distance anymore, it was in the air itself, pressing against my skin, my lungs, turning each breath into fire. My mask helped, but not enough. Sweat dripped into my eyes. My legs ached, every step a battle. My vision swam. I needed water. I reached for my pack, hands shaking as I pulled the bottle out. Half empty. The last thing Aaron had touched before he fell. I didn't want to drink it. But I had no choice. The first sip felt like swallowing needles. The second, like relief. I kept walking. The first body appeared just before sunset. I almost missed it at first, just another shape in the ash, half buried under the gray snowfall. But as I got closer, the outline became clearer. Arms curled inward. Knees drawn up to the chest. A person. Frozen in place. I stopped. The body was covered in a thick layer of ash, almost like stone. Their face, if there was one, was completely obscured, turned upward as if they had been looking at the sky when it happened. I swallowed hard. Pompeii. That was the only word my brain could form. I had seen pictures of it before. The bodies preserved in volcanic rock, their last moments captured forever. It had seemed unreal then, something distant and ancient. Now, I was standing next to one. I wanted to move. I needed to move. But my body wouldn't listen. Then I saw the others. Not just one. Dozens. Littering the hillside, some collapsed where they had stood, others piled against rocks and trees as if they had tried to shield themselves from the burning air. Some still had their hands covering their faces, frozen in the final, useless act of protection. I staggered backward. My breath came too fast. I turned and ran. Night fell. I didn't stop moving. The lava was still coming. I could see the glow from behind the hills, creeping closer, unstoppable. The heat made it impossible to tell if I was still sweating or if my skin had simply given up. I had to find shelter. That was the only thought left in my mind. And then I saw it. A structure. Small. Hidden against the trees. I didn't think, I just ran for it. The door was ajar. I shoved it open and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. Darkness. My breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. I ripped off my mask, collapsing onto the floor. For the first time in hours, I let myself break. My hands shook. My body ached. Aaron was dead. I was alone. And I was still trapped. I don't know how long I lay there, curled on the floor of that shack, breathing in the stale, smoke-tainted air. My body had shut down, too exhausted to fight anymore. The heat, the ash, the burning in my lungs, it all blurred into one suffocating weight pressing down on me. Every part of me ached. My skin felt raw, my throat a desert, my limbs leaden and useless. Aaron was dead. That thought kept replaying in my mind, over and over, like a broken record. Aaron was dead. He had been right there, and then he was gone, swallowed by the earth. And I had just left him. I wanted to die. It would have been so easy. Just close my eyes. Just stop. Let the heat take me, let the island erase me the way it had erased everything else. But something wouldn't let me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the stupid, useless part of my brain that still clung to survival. Maybe it was guilt. I forced myself to sit up. The shack was small, barely more than a supply shed. A few rusted tools leaned against the wall. A wooden shelf held empty water bottles, moldy tarps, and a broken radio. The air inside was thick, suffocating. I needed to move. I staggered to my feet, gripping the wall as the world tilted around me. My head pounded. The heat outside was seeping in, making the walls sweat. I reached for the door. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was the sky. Or what was left of it. The world outside had turned red. A sick, burning red, choked with ash and smoke, swirling like a living thing. The ground was barely visible beneath the thick, smothering layers of soot. Embers danced in the air, carried on the wind like fireflies from hell. The air hummed with an unnatural, oppressive energy, the kind that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. And then I saw them. The bodies. At first, they looked like statues, frozen figures standing in the haze, covered in ash. But they weren't statues. They were people. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Standing still. Motionless. Some had their hands raised as if trying to shield their faces. Others were reaching outward, as if trying to grab hold of something, someone, who wasn't there. Their bodies were coated in a thick, hardened layer of ash, turning them into grotesque sculptures of their final moments. Their faces were twisted in agony, mouths open in silent screams. It was Pompeii. It was worse than Pompeii. Because they weren't lying on the ground. They were standing. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. And then, one of them moved. Not much. Just the slightest twitch of a finger. But I saw it. I know I saw it. I stared, frozen, my heart slamming against my ribs. The figure didn't move again. It was just standing there, unmoving, like the others. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks on me. The heat. The exhaustion. But then another one moved. A slow, shuddering tilt of the head. A breath of ash slipping from between cracked lips. I took another step back, my body screaming at me to run. And then, they all turned to look at me. Every single one. A chorus of brittle, creaking sounds filled the air, like old wood snapping under pressure. Their heads twisted, their empty eyes locking onto me, their mouths still frozen in those silent, gaping screams. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then, one of them stepped forward. The sound it made was wrong. A dry, crumbling shift, like dead leaves being crushed underfoot. A thick puff of ash broke away from its body, floating into the air. Then another one moved. Then another. They weren't fast. They weren't running. They were just walking. Walking toward me. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the doorframe. My legs refused to work properly, my vision swimming. The heat pressed against me, suffocating. I turned and ran. The world blurred around me as I ran, my lungs burning, my legs shaking. My breath rasped through the mask, each inhale a battle against the thick, poisoned air. The figures were still moving. Not chasing, not running, just walking. Always walking. The island was falling apart. The ground trembled beneath me, deep cracks splitting the earth like veins of fire. The sky rumbled, and another explosion shook the air, sending fresh waves of ash rolling down the mountainside. There was nowhere left to go. No way out. I stumbled to a stop near the edge of a cliff, my feet inches from the drop. Below, the ocean churned violently, waves crashing against the burning shoreline. The water was boiling, steam rising in thick clouds. There were no boats. No way across. I turned back. The figures were closer now. Their bodies cracked and flaked as they moved, pieces of them breaking away, crumbling into dust. Their mouths were still open, as if screaming without sound. Their arms reached forward, fingers stretching. Reaching for me. I looked past them, toward the burning jungle, the molten rivers carving their way across the land. The entire island was a graveyard now. A tomb of fire and ash. I had nowhere to go. I had nothing left. I felt my body sway, the exhaustion washing over me in waves. Then, the nearest figure stopped. It was inches from me now. And as I looked into its face, I realized, I knew it. Even beneath the ash, beneath the frozen mask of agony, I recognized it. Aaron. His mouth was open in a silent scream, his eyes burned away, his skin hardened into a brittle shell of what he had been. But it was him. I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. His head tilted slightly, the motion stiff and unnatural, as if the bones inside had fused together. And then, in the thick, suffocating silence, he took another step forward. Reaching for me. Something in me broke. I let out a choked sob, my knees giving out, my body crumpling. I had run. I had fought. I had survived. For what? To die here? To become one of them? The heat pressed against me. The ground shook. The ocean boiled. The sky screamed. And as Aaron's fingers brushed my arm, everything turned black.